personal problems, their crises, you know, we get all kinds of stuff that our colleagues don't. And, you know, sometimes, honestly, some days it feels burdensome. Some days it feels like a privilege. You know, some days it feels like I feel good about the fact that the students on this campus feel like I'm someone that they can come to, you know, and that I'm going to show up and do my best to try to give them the support and the encouragement and nurturing and everything that they need. So, you know, I try my hardest to do that. I was talking with Giselle about this the other day, about the fact that sometimes I feel like I wasn't trained to do this. Like, I was trained to be a historian. I'm not a therapist or like a psychologist. You know what I mean? I'm a historian. Like, I don't necessarily feel like I'm trained, you know, to always give the students the best of what they, you know, what they actually need. But, you know, most days I feel privileged about the fact that I have an opportunity to give that, and that I'm able to give what wasn't necessarily there for like our generation. You know, we didn't have faculty like that looked like us, you know, or as many of us as, you know, there are now. So it makes me feel good that we can be part of that group. But it is something you have to kind of prepare yourself for, because there are going to be days where it's going to feel overwhelming and burdensome, because you do have to show up and bring more than most of your colleagues do.
So we'll open up for questions. You can either just ask a general question to the panel, or if you want to ask a specific professor a question, feel free to do that as well. Who has questions? You can share your war stories.
Yeah.
Danielle.
So thank you, thank you for your insight on sort of keeping yourself separate from the workplace. But I wonder how you have been navigating things like Facebook and other social media where your self is sort of on display, and if you have, you know, set rules for who you friend and don't friend, and if you have all kinds of different colleague groups and student groups and personal groups, and sort of, you know, do Twitter, I don't know, because I feel like I'm pretty open about who I am on Facebook. A lot of you know that. And it's closed to the public, but I mean, if you're a friend, then you can pretty much see everything up from a person, especially political views. And so I guess, how do you just navigate that space and try and keep it separate?
I'll take it, yeah. So I
You're the
avoid
communications professor.
Facebook account. And I simply avoid posting any personal information. If I post anything, it's like about Zumba.
Yeah. She's my Zumba instructor.
That's how I met Dawn.
Yeah.
And even with Zumba, sometimes I don't want, like, everyone should try Zumba, by the way. My hobby, basically, I created my Zumba group on Facebook because I don't want my work colleagues to know just how much time I'm spending on Zumba or how much fun I'm having there, because that's the only thing I'm posting about. So I do have to filter all of that. And then also I have full control over anything that's posted. Like, I need to approve everything if it's going to show up on my timeline. And, but again, that's just the decision I made, that like, I'm just going to use my Facebook account, my profile, to keep in touch with people, not to display myself to people. I have a friend who has 2 different Facebook accounts. One is like for her professional, you know, career self, and then the other one is for her personal life. And so that way she can disclose as much information as she wants, while still accountable on this other end. So it's up to you to decide like what would work best for you. What do you want to get out of that site that you're using?
Dr. Meg, I think you were the first person I ever saw with a Facebook policy in your
Yeah.
Yeah, she's
I don't. Yeah, I mean, well, so for a bunch of you guys are my Facebook friends, and you know I go on Facebook like once every like 3 months or something. So I'm probably the wrong person in some ways to answer this question. And I don't even understand what Twitter is or how it works. So I had nothing to do with that. But yeah, I did decide to put a Facebook policy in my syllabus. I kind of had like a short, and it's funny because ever since I put it in there, like no one had ever asked me anyway, but I kind of went through a brief period of time where students would be like, oh, I want to, you know, friend you on Facebook, and I actually made the decision not so much because I felt like, oh, I don't want my students to know anything about me, although in retrospect I think that would have been the more important reason. But it was actually kind of more because I didn't want students to feel like they had a particular relationship with me that then the other students who for whatever reason weren't on Facebook or didn't, you know, I didn't want to sort of create feelings of inequality. Where some students felt like they were closer to me, or other students felt like, oh, well, I didn't ask her to be my Facebook friend, so that's why she gave me a bad grade, and she doesn't like me, or, you know, whatever. I didn't want to create that kind of weirdness. So, you know, some of the grad students in here who are my Facebook friends know that I'm Facebook friends with my graduate students, but not with my undergraduate students. And I actually kind of just have the policy that I don't become your Facebook friend until you've graduated from OSU. So I've had students who have since graduated, you know, who are like, okay, can we be Facebook friends now? You know, and I'm like, okay, sure. You know, most of them by then I think have forgotten about it. But you know, so that has just been kind of my just sort of personal philosophy about it, is that, you know, I feel like the graduate students are kind of a different category, so I'll be friends with them. But undergraduates, I just kind of am not, and you know, particularly when they're in my class, because I just feel like that creates kind of an awkward thing. But I guess I just haven't been all that worried about, I mean, you guys know, I put all my political stuff out there, I mean, the truth is, I'm just not that technologically savvy. I don't even really understand how to read my own timeline. So it's like, you know, it's not like I'm putting tons of stuff up there anyway, just because I don't really get how it works. But I haven't really had concerns about putting things up there about my personal life or about my political views. But I will say that I think as a general rule, it is important to be mindful about what you put out there. Judy probably remembers that one of our former department chairs, every time someone applied to the department for a job, would Google them. And so, you know, it is important to keep in mind that everything you put out there, to the extent that it is publicly accessible, you know, if it comes up when, you know, you Google yourself or someone else Googles you, that is becoming more and more of, you know, a thing that search committees will do, or department chairs will do, or even deans will do, you know. So you do want to be kind of mindful about what you want to have out in the public domain. Now, something like Facebook, you know, it's private, you can kind of control who has access to that information, but just in general, you know.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because I know just with the stuff that's been going on campus for the last year, a lot of us have been in the news for some serious like activist work.
Yeah.
So when we get Googled, those things now come up.
Yeah.
Do you think that that is going to impact like our space in the job market because we've been activists surrounding like racial issues?
I mean, you know, the truth is, I think it actually has the potential to be both positive and negative. You know what I mean? And again, it kind of has to do with what the larger climate at a particular university or department is. So it is true that some departments or, you know, institutions will kind of look at that and be concerned about that, like, oh, this person, you know, is an activist. But I think there are some departments and institutions that would look at that and say, oh, here's someone who's actually really committed to creating a more inclusive climate on the department, you know, and on the university campus, like someone who's willing to take their time to contribute to, you know, speak out on these things. And so I think there are some, you know, places that would actually see that as a positive thing. But yeah, it's important to keep in mind, you know, that kind of stuff is going to be out there. And I have had, when I've been on the job market, situations where people have asked me questions. Oh, I saw that you signed this petition, you know, about this particular thing. You know, talk a little bit about that. So you just have to be prepared that anything that comes up, you know, when your name gets Googled, may come up, you know, in a job situation. You kind of got to be prepared for it.
What I was saying earlier about how you need to be able to translate your life passions into something that's recognizable from your institution, I think that's true for activism. right? There's a reason why you're committed to something that you're so passionate about, that you're spending all this time doing this, right? And so you need to be able to frame that commitment into something that's relevant for education. So I think it's about how to narrate those experiences. Yeah. Do you have a question?
I actually have a question. Thank you. Also, you're welcome. And I was curious, given that most of you, well, given that none of you actually come from Columbus, and Columbus is not the most racially diverse city in the world, I suppose my question is given the fact that academia asks you to move wherever it is you can find a job, no matter how far that is from family or friends, and that sometimes they're in very, say, like white areas, how do you negotiate that? Like, how do you find a community, and how do you deal with, particularly once you get to faculty, there are even less of you than there are when we're grad students. So like, how do you do that, I suppose?
That's a great question. I remember when I was living in California thinking that I was falling off the edge of the earth. And then, but when I got here, I discovered that Columbus is a city. It's the 15th largest city. I don't know what that means. There must be a big drop off from New York and Chicago. But there were actually, Chinese grocery stores, and that there were things that were sort of interesting to explore. Not as interesting as the Bay Area, but interesting enough. And when I did go to faculty orientation, I just remember thinking, wow, this is really white and male. It reminded me of my first day in grad school. And it took a while for me to figure out who my allies were in grad school. And I think the same thing is true for OSU. Like that first encounter, you're really feeling like, okay, I'm the only one here. But over time, you start discovering other people with common interests, who have similar kind of social experiences. And so I think you start developing those networks.
I make sure that you negotiate for a very good and generous travel fund. And I'm serious, because what saved me in Montana was as soon as it got too small, too white, no Asian Americans. Like I cried on the way back from Salt Lake City to, so that you're going through Seattle or you're going through Salt Lake City. From Salt Lake City to LA, there were 2 Asian American students maybe, and they were hanging out, talking to each other on the other side of the plane. I was like, oh my God, come on, this is my family. What have I done, So, you'll have those moments. But you have a travel fund, and if you really are the only person on this campus, then they will probably give you research funding that you might be competitive for, and that's what I got, to go to a lot of conferences. And that's what was really the savior for myself. And for many people who are maybe, who are white too, but their politics don't match with the middle of nowhere that they are in. And it has been a saving grace for many of my colleagues of various racial backgrounds. But, so I'm being half facetious, but it's very true that that was very important. Now the drawback, which I was just talking with one of my colleagues last night, was that the people around you, if you really are that one person, they want you to be there all the time, to remind them of how diverse and liberal-minded they are. And when you leave to go to these conferences, they're worried that someone else wants you. So last night I was talking with this one colleague, not here, and she was saying that she was told to stop going to conferences so much because that was going to interfere with her teaching. But the real subtext, right, is that you're going to leave because you're building up the CV, and you're going to leave us, and we will no longer be able to be reminded about how liberal and wonderful we are to have hired you, right, and made you want to come and be one of us, right? So it's making that balance, I think, of yes, traveling as often as possible, but also kind of reassuring your department that you're not secretly trying to leave, and then you are.
I was just thinking, I was trying to recruit this undergraduate to go to Stanford for grad school, and she was trying to decide between Stanford and UCLA. I think she had been to UCLA. She was Filipina, and she would have been the first Filipina grad student that we had. And I remember taking her to a staff member who was Filipina, and she said, "Do you want to be a pioneer?" And I was like, "Sign me up!" But there is something about how you're going to have a potentially bigger impact at those places, right? Because they've never had